Hello everyone. This is the last lecture of this week. Today we will be discussing about how do we do this entire research design. So from next week onwards we will be going into individual methods in detail, and this last lecture will actually bring together all that we have been discussing in the first week and the second week. So here we will define research design and its role in structuring a study from question to analysis. We will distinguish between qualitative, quantitative and mixed method paradigms and when to use each one of them. We will apply a decision framework to select methods matching your questions and constraints, and we will create a research plan and anticipate challenges before we go ahead with data collection. So, what is research design? So, if I look at the overall structure of research design, I have to have research questions, research paradigm, data collection methods, participant sampling, data analysis methods, and timeline and resource. So, when I am looking at research questions, it is defining the core problem and what you need to discover. Research paradigm, I will be choosing the qualitative, quantitative or mixed methods. Data collection methods, I will be selecting the tools. So, I want to conduct interviews or surveys, or I want to do observations and so on. Participant sampling, I want to decide who, how many and how to recruit about my sample of participants. Data analysis, so I will plan how I will code the data, how I will do statistical analysis, how will I have triangulation. Triangulation is about when I use multiple ways to collect data for the same intent and try to see whether all of them point to the same conclusion or not. Let's say, for example, you are conducting a survey in which you are asking people about what is your annual income. Now, people might report their annual income honestly or dishonestly. They might also report a wrong income because they just themselves do not know what is their actual income. So, in order to avoid these biases, I will have many other questions in the questionnaire. So, I will ask them, how much do you approximately spend every month on food? How much do you approximately spend every month on logistics? And so on. So, when I bring all these data together, I am able to triangulate if the reported data on each one of these aspects is correct and to what degree there is a deviation. Now, that was about triangulation built in a survey questionnaire itself. I can also have triangulation by using different data collection methods. So, I had a survey which asked certain questions. I will also conduct interviews with certain number of people, and I will bring the information together and I will see whether both the information triangulates with each other or not. Then comes the timeline and resources, which is about estimating the duration, budget and the team's capacity. So, any research design incorporates all these different aspects. So, when you are doing a method selection, you have to consider all these different aspects as well. So, the first question that you have to ask yourself is, what do I need to learn? Am I exploring something? So, I do not know much about that phenomena. Let's say I want to understand how people use the park in the morning for what all different kinds of activities, what are the kind of interactions which is happening, is the current park infrastructure sufficient to support all of these things, how people feel inside the park. So, what I am interested over here is a exploratory research. So, that is, so you are supposed to select a qualitative method. Now, let's say I already have created a certain design for the park. So, after looking at the parks, the activities which happen in the park, I realize that there are not many play possibilities for the kids of that particular area. So, I decided that I will build some slides and merry-go-round kind of instruments in the park so that kids can have a good time as well in the morning. Now, after I have put that infrastructure, I need to validate whether these are working as desired or whether kids are not interested in it or whether parents still don't want to bring the kids to the park. So, that is about validation. So, here I do quantitative research. So, I will compare before versus this current new situation, what is the changes which are happening. Then I might also have a very complex scenario. So, let's say when I want to understand why people are not bringing their kids, still that I brought in so many nice slides in the park, I will have to do interviews and try to understand from the adults in that particular park that why they are not bringing the kids, and then I get to know what is still the stumbling block. So I am using complex methods over here, which implies I am using mixed methods. So a combination of qualitative and quantitative. Then my next set of questions are around who are my users. So if you might have a homogeneous user, so which is like a small group of users who are very similar to each other. Let's say you built a yoga room in your society's common area. So since it is a yoga room, so you know that it is supposed to be used by a very small homogeneous group of people who are interested in yoga or meditation and use this particular facility. So in this particular case, any research will be conducted with a small focused sample. However, if I am looking at a heterogeneous sample, so let's say this society of mine is a very big society and there are about 8,000 to 10,000 people living in this society. So the common area of this particular society needs to cater to the needs of as many people as possible. So I have to also give a priority which all things should be in the common area and which all things can be left out at this point of time, and which all areas can be designed to be multi-purpose. So in that particular context, select a stratified sample by understanding the different kinds of people in your society and recruiting people from each demographic group. Now, hard to reach people. If I want to understand how people are going to, let's say in this particular society there are some people who are cancer survivors and they need certain kind of a wellness service and you want to offer that. Now this is a hard to reach sample because you might not know who all are those people. So in that particular context you can use snowball sampling, where you come to know about the first person and then that first person might help you in connecting to the next person. They might also help you in connecting to some other people in another society who might be having similar kind of a facility, which also helps you in understanding their reaction to such kind of facilities. Now the third one is about what is your timeline. So do you have very short time, so just few weeks, then try to do quick surveys. If you have like a few months with you, then try to have a more balanced approach. Do some surveys and also conduct some qualitative research in order to get more in-depth answers to the whys and hows. If you have, let's say, longer than 6 months, you can also engage into deeper studies like ethnographic research, which usually requires a lot of time and immersion from the side of the researcher into the participant's environment. Now comes to the resources required. If you are trying to go for a qualitative research, you might require 1 to 2 researchers at least, and they should be skilled in taking interviews or be skilled at being a moderator if you are conducting a focus group study. They should also have deep domain knowledge in order to provide the probes or to ask the questions that they are supposed to ask. The monetary requirement can be between low to medium. So you might have to give participants some kind of incentives. The biggest expense in terms of money as well as time goes in the analysis of qualitative data. So you will have lots of these data which needs to converted verbatim into text. So you might have to invest into transcription tools, or in case there is a language barrier, you might have to also invest into somebody who can translate. You have to also have recording equipment. It might take weeks to months to conduct this. So your participants might demand you that come in this particular time or only have half an hour and can you finish it within half an hour. So you will have to look at all these flexibilities in timeline and plan accordingly. You might also have to, maybe somebody gave you half an hour only now, you might have to plan for another half an hour somewhere else. Sometimes you might also have to do iterative data collection. So from 10 participants you came to know about something and your 11th participant gave you some very new different kind of data. You might want to go back again and find out whether the same thing was valid for everyone. You might also initially do some exploratory research, and then once your exploratory research has been analyzed, you want to go back to your participants and do further probing questions also. You might also draw your conclusions, and then you might have to again go back to your participants to check with them whether your conclusions are what they meant. Now coming to quantitative research, again you might need between 1 to 3 researchers. The researchers in this case must be somebody who knows how to design surveys, because when you are giving away surveys there is nobody to explain the questions. So the questions need to be very clear and no ambiguity should be present. That's why the survey design is extremely important. You would also need to have statisticians in your group who will be able to do proper statistical analysis, or somebody who knows about how to do statistical analysis. If you are collecting large scale data, you would also need somebody who knows how to manage large scale data. The expenses in this case can be between medium to high, because survey platforms also charge you a lot of money for hosting these. There are several survey platforms who also charge you money for recruiting the participants. The participant panels, you might also have to give them incentives. You will also have to invest in certain kind of analytical softwares to do the statistical analysis. This whole process might take from weeks to months, depending on how large your sample size is, how difficult it is to reach to people, how long your survey is. Longer the survey, more people will reject to respond to it. So think of the timelines that you are okay with taking, and plan your structured data collection with these defined endpoints accordingly. Now, when we are targeting for mixed methods, when we are targeting that we will use some qualitative methods and some quantitative methods and combine the data together. So, I might require 2 to 4 or more than that researchers. I need cross-functional team combining both the expertise of conducting qualitative research as well as quantitative research. The expenses in these cases goes pretty high up, also because we are trying to target both the paradigms. Also the time required also starts going up. However, the time depends whether you are planning for sequential or concurrent phases, and your entire duration is about the longest duration for whichever activity requires the longest duration. Now, when we are trying to compare these methods, we also have to look at the purpose, the methods, the sample, the strength and the limitations. So, if you have a qualitative research, your purpose should be mostly to explore and generate hypotheses. If you are doing quantitative, your purpose should be testing hypothesis and measuring the prevalence of something. If you are trying mixed methods, then you are trying to combine both the depth of qualitative and the breadth of quantitative. In case of qualitative, you are using methods like interviews, observation and co-design. For quantitative, it can be surveys, experiments, A/B testing, and in mixed methods, I try to combine the methods from both the field, either for them to be working in sequence with each other or to work together. In case of qualitative, try to reach a sample size of 5 to 15 and use wherever possible, use this idea of the saturation to decide, okay, I don't need to interview any more people. If you have quantitative data collection, try to recruit at least 50 participants. It can also increase depending on the statistical analysis that you want to do. Mixed method again varies by the phase, by the method that you select. The biggest strength of qualitative data, it is rich and gives you deep insights. However, the limitation is it is not generalizable because you reached out to very few number of people. The quantitative data, if your sampling was appropriate, then you can generalize the results. The limitation is it is surface level understanding and it is not possible to go into the depth. So, mixed methods, that's why it offers you this benefit of triangulation and completeness of depth versus width. However, it is very resource intensive and you have to consider what resources are available before committing to a particular method. So, when you are building your research plan, you have to look at all these different things and plan accordingly. So, first you will start writing down the research questions that you have. you use the SMART questions that define exactly what you need to learn and why. Have as few questions as is necessary. Every extra question implies more people will reject it. You need more time, you need more resources to both collect the data as well as analyze the data. Participant profiles, select who to recruit, how many, and selection criteria for your sample. Then the data collection method, you have to select the methods, tools, settings and session protocol for gathering your data. Then you will have to look at your timeline and resources, budget, personal tools and scheduling for each phase. When you are trying to do the analysis, you have to look at the right method, coding, thematic analysis or statistical methods for your data. And you have to look at ethical considerations. So, how will you collect the informed consent, how will you do data protection and how will you safeguard your participants. So, the key to doing your user research like a pro is write your plan before collecting the data. It gives you clarity and prevents drift. So, let's take an example now. Let's say I want to do a mixed methods research for a fitness. So, for the qualitative part, I want to do a research with 24 interviews across 3 segments: athletes, elderly, chronic illness people. And I want to understand what is their data trust with this particular watch, how much is the information density with which they are okay, and what is the emotional anxiety level when they are trying to operate these watches. For the quantitative survey, my aim is I will survey 250 fitness watch users. I will validate the interview themes. So, which means I will have to have again the same groups: athletes, elderly and chronic illness people. I will validate the interview themes which came up and measure segment specific prevalence. So, which implies that it is sequential. First I have to complete my qualitative, then I can go with my quantitative. Then I will do the integration. So, interview insights will inform about the survey design. Survey reveals theme prevalence. Both will drive the feature prioritization. So, in this case, because it is sequential, I decided my quantitative survey questionnaire will be designed post I have got the results from the qualitative and I have completed the analysis. So, my design decisions will be grounded on the depth which the interview gives and the breadth which the survey gives. Now, when I am trying to do this research method selection, the data analysis approaches are extremely important. So, if I have qualitative analysis, so because I have done qualitative research, my aim is to identify patterns and construct user stories from these rich unstructured data which has been collected. So, I will be doing coding. I will identify the themes. I want to do an affinity mapping where I want to see how two themes or how two different kinds of people or how two different kinds of products have some kind of affinity, and on the basis of that I will create these groups. I want to create a journey map. So, journey map is something wherein I try to say how a person uses a product, or let's say how a person decides to buy a particular product. It is the entire journey of making a particular decision, whether it be a performance decision like how do I want to record my data, or it can be also a decision to buy something, or a decision to select between two different options. And I also use a method called as narrative analysis, where I am trying to do the analysis of the story that the user is telling me. If I have quantitative data, then quantitative analysis is trying to measure, compare and model user behavior with statistical methods to validate the findings at scale. Let's say I identify that out of my 500 participants, which is equally distributed, 250 males and 250 females, and I try to understand what kind of games they like to play. So, after doing the counting, so I identified that 100 boys like to play simulation game, whereas only 50 girls like to play simulation game. 200 boys like to play RPG games, whereas only 50 girls like to play RPG games. 50 boys like to play collaborative games, 250 girls like to play collaborative games. So if my data was like that, I have to identify whether there is a pattern, whether I can really say that the 251st person that I pick up, whether boy or girl, can I predict what their preference for the game will be. So I do quantitative analysis to understand these kind of features, whether whatever I identified in this particular group can be used as a predicting mechanism at scale. So in this case, firstly, as I told you in this example, I was talking about descriptive stats. I was telling you in each of these groups how many boys and how many girls were there. Then I need to do whether there is a correlation and whether there is a cause and effect relation, and whether I can group people into categories. So in order to do that, I will do comparative analysis and I will do correlational and regressional analysis. So all these things fall under the category of inferential statistics. We will discuss more about them when we go into the statistics lectures. Now comes planning and bias reduction. So pre-specify the codes, specifically in qualitative analysis. If you want to avoid biases, it is very good idea that in the very beginning pre-specify the codes. However, sometimes we are interested more in open coding, wherein we do not start with a set of codings. However, even in that particular context, I should have my research question, because even the open coding has to happen against those research questions. This helps in reducing biases when you are trying to go through your collected data. Also fix upon the analysis method. I also determine the success criteria before data collection. You start with that so that you can ensure that there is as less bias as possible. Whatever biases are there, they have been accounted for in the limitation section, and we are able to reduce researcher bias. Now, some of the key techniques for this particular activity are: we have pre-registered code books where we enter all the codes that we will be using. We can also create a defined list of success criteria. I will also use peer review of protocols. So I created the protocols, then I will get it reviewed by 2 or 3 reviewers, and then I will see whether there is consensus. Wherever there is lack of consensus, I will try to do modifications in that protocol in order to avoid researcher bias. So qualitative analysis techniques, the thematic process moves in this particular fashion. I will first have the raw codes. So let's say my example is I check my watch 20 times a day, but I don't trust the calorie count at all. Your user is saying that. So because I had already fixed codes that against which I wanted to do my coding. So one of my code was about data trust. So I say that users doubt accuracy of calorie tracking feature. Now this particular code will go into the theme which is about trust deficit. You might have other features also wherein the user might be having lot of trust. So they will go into another theme which is about high trust or whatever, depends on what is coming out, you will name the theme accordingly. Now multiple participants will answer this particular question, which will help you in understanding whether this calorie feature has trust issues with other participants also or not. Once you have gathered that okay, there are substantial number of people who are talking about it, you can collect quantitative data to see whether it is so at scale also or not. So the insight that I am getting from here is user needs visible data source transparency to build trust in health metrics. So in my follow-up questions, I can also ask how can I improve the design so that you have better trust on it, or what is it right now that is making you not trust it. I can create affinity mapping. So I have, let's say, 200 plus interviews, and I will cluster them into shared boards. I will also create a journey map where I will plot the user's experience timeline from setting up the fitness watch to their daily use and marking all pain points and all emotional highs that they might be having. I can also do a narrative analysis, which means I will examine how users tell their fitness story, the kind of language that they are doing, the choices of their language, their motivations. I'm also doing this video recording. I can also try to analyze the way their voice changes. I can try to understand the unmet needs which is happening. So in qualitative research, the key idea is let the themes emerge from the data. Don't force courses into preset categories. Code iteratively, refine themes with your team, and always trace insights back to the raw data. So whenever you are doing this coding process, it is not sufficient to do it with a single coder. Multiple coders should do it simultaneously, but without looking at each other's codes, and then they should bring it together on the table and discuss and finalize the codes. We also have something called as coder reliability testing, which are statistical methods to check if there were 3 coders, what was the degree of consensus and whether that is acceptable or not. When you are doing quantitative analysis, then the first method that we discussed was about descriptive statistics. So it describes your results. So the first descriptive statistics can be the research was conducted with 500 people, 60% of which were males and 40% were females. 10% of them belong to the age group of 18 to 25, 20% belong to the next age group. Then I can also report in terms of descriptive statistics. The mean satisfaction with the app was 3.8 out of 5. 68% use calorie tracking daily. Median session length is 12 minutes. So these are all describing your data and are called descriptive statistics. They help you to establish the baseline picture of your user behavior across the sample. Then I will do comparative test. The comparative tests tell you whether the differences are real or not, and just they are sampling noises. So I identified that 68% of the people use calorie tracking daily, and the mean satisfaction is 3.8. However, I identified that the casual users, they have a mean satisfaction of 3.2, the athletes have 4.4, and the t-test, the probability values are 0.001. So 0.001 implies over here that at 99% confidence level, you can say that if somebody is a casual user, their satisfaction is going to be lower than that of the athletes. So my athletes love that particular product because 5 is highly satisfied and it is 4.4, whereas the casual users, they are at 3.2, which is basically neither like nor dislike, but little bit more on the like side. So because I got a p value of 0.001, which is less than 0.001, I can say that the differences are real and not just by chance. So if I find another athlete or another casual user, the chances of a similar result is very high. Correlation and regression analysis. So in regression, the main aim why I am trying to do correlation and regression is to understand which factors to prioritize for maximum impact. So let's say the regression data says that beta is 0.42 and feature awareness says beta is data trust beta is 0.42 and feature awareness beta is 0.31. So they all predict satisfaction at R square equal to 0.38. So which implies that data trust is more important than feature awareness for satisfaction prediction. So if I have to improve the satisfaction, then I will have to improve more on the data trust because that will have a greater impact. Now, planning and bias reduction techniques that we use. As we discussed, we use pre-registered code books. So they help every code must be justified before seeing the data. I will be reviewing this with my peer review team. I will also define the success criteria. This will remove ambiguity from decision making. I will also use my peer review team to review these protocols also. Then when I am doing this, so let's say 2 colleagues independently code 20% of the transcript, then I will calculate the inter-rater reliability. And if you are trying to create a survey instrument, it is usually a good idea to get it reviewed by 3 domain experts before you launch it. So to summarize, method should follow the question. The worst research design results from forcing data into pre-chosen methods. The key takeaways: design before you collect, match the method to the question. There are 3 question frameworks. Ask what you need to learn, who your users are, and what your timeline allows to systematically select the right method, and plan it appropriately to reduce biases. So these are some of the key references that you can go through. This brings us to the end of this week. There is a small video after this which summarizes this week. See you next week when we start talking about individual research techniques in detail with case studies. Thank you so much.